Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Real Science Exchange, the pubcast where leading scientists and industry professionals meet over a few drinks to discuss the latest ideas and trends in animal nutrition. Hi, I'm Scott Sorrell. I'm going to be your host here tonight at the Real Science Exchange. We're going to take a deep dive into, yes, again, one of my favorite segments, which is the Journal Club with Dr. Bill Weiss. Tonight, we're going to be reviewing a paper written by Dr. Adam Locke from Michigan State University. And that paper was titled Potential Low-Forage Diets to Maintain Milk Production in Forage-Limited Situations. But before we get started, I want to introduce our emeritus professor, Dr. Bill Weiss. Bill, thanks for joining us again here at the Real Science Exchange.
Good to be back. Nice to see you again.
Bill, you're always good at bringing a new beer for us to sample. What do you got in store for us tonight?
This was a Christmas present. It's honey blonde ale from Central Waters Brewing Company in Wisconsin. First time I've ever had it. It's quite tasty.
Is it good? Have you met many that weren't very tasty?
Well, there's a few. There's one from Australia that comes to mind, but we won't mention that.
So, Bill, why don't you introduce the guest that you brought with you tonight?
The author of the corresponding author of this paper is Dr. Adam Locke from Michigan State. He's from the Wright School up north. I've known him since he's been, I think, almost in the U.S. It's been a very long time since I met him. I think he's worked at Michigan State his entire career. If I'm not, you can correct me, Adam. But he's a world expert in fat nutrition of dairy cows.
Very well. Well, welcome back, Adam. Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Now, in pre-show prep, we were talking about whiskeys, and one of your favorites is, I believe, Bushmill. You want to tell us a little bit about that, and what's special about Bushmill whiskey?
Well, it's mostly a special to myself. It was the last. It was a distillery my dad and I visited a few years before he passed away, and whenever I see a bottle of it now, if I return back to home or over here, I like to try some of it. It's an Irish whiskey, so it's triple distilled, so it's very smooth.
Yeah,
and it has good meaning to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've not had any, but you can count that I'm going to try to find one. So appreciate that. We also have with us our co-host once again, Dr. Clay Zimmerman. Clay, welcome.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
What are you drinking tonight?
Well, tonight I'm enjoying, again, from our local brewery. This one is called a Yeti Experimental Sour. So it's a sour beer.
Oh.
I kind of like those. I had one the very first time. Bill, you're having a beer from Wisconsin. The very first sour I ever had was in Wisconsin. I believe it was Madison. So that's what I'm having tonight. So as we get started, before we start our conversation, gentlemen, I'd like to raise a glass to a great panel here tonight, great scientists, and to a great discussion ahead. Cheers.
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 New research is changing everything we thought we knew about choline's impact on the cow and her calf, and top scientists have a lot to say about it. They are presenting new research that supports choline as a required nutrient to optimize milk production, choline as a required nutrient to support a healthy transition, choline as a required nutrient to improve calf health and growth, and choline as a required nutrient to increase colostrum quantity. This new research is solidifying choline's role as a required nutrient for essentially every cow, regardless of health status, milk production level, or body condition score. Learn more about the science that is changing the game and the choline source that is making it happen. Reassure precision-release choline from Balchem. Visit balchem.com/scientistsay to learn more.
So, Bill, why don't you get us started? Walk us into the paper that you selected for us tonight.
Before I get into that, Adam, this was a graduate student. We all depend so much on them. So why don't you give us a little bit of information on the student who did this, what they're doing now, and et cetera.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. All of these research that any of us have done all rely, is done by the great grad students we have. So this was Ariana Negrero. This one of her master's projects with me. First got to meet her as an undergrad. She spent a couple of years in our lab as an undergrad. She's originally from Florida. After she finished her master's, she's now doing a PhD at the University of Wisconsin with Zhao Duro in sort of artificial intelligence, big data, and she's doing a lot of great things there, and it's going to be exciting to see what she does in the future.
I'll get into the paper here. This is a topic that when I was working at Ohio State, we'd have droughts about every 5 or 6 years, severe droughts. We'd have limited forage supply. So this would be a question that I got a lot is what do we do when forage is limited? So why don't you start again with, I always ask, what's the hypothesis? Why'd you do the experiment? What's the hypothesis?
That's it. Great. I appreciate that. To start that discussion, I should give a shout out for the last 10 years now. MSU and the state government have had this Michigan Alliance for Animal Agriculture that's commodity supported, university and state supported, that is allowing us to do some of these applied research questions that might not specifically be applicable to one, one company or another, but are important to the industry. This study wasn't originally, when we first got this Michigan Alliance for Animal Ag project to look at this area here, it wasn't specifically on low forage, but that 2018-2019 growing season, we had really bad forage yield, forage quality here. And that was the big question. And so we were able to slightly switch around this study to focus it just on low forage diets. So the concept there being, like you're saying, it's years of forage shortages, maybe from drought, or maybe more common now, growing farm size. That one's certainly applicable to us here now with the new dairy facility about halfway being built now, and we're going from like 200 to 600 milking cows. So, we're having a lot of these questions now about the forage needs for those cows. So, so we wanted to design a study which was very practical, and it simply address, could we feed a low forage diet and get at least as good milk components, or maybe even better? So this was not a typical study where maybe we just change one ingredient or one nutrient. This was more of I call it a conceptual type study, and what we thought might be helpful if we had to feed a very low forage diet, that what would be helpful to allow us to get as good a milk production as a fairly typical Midwest or Michigan diet.
And the treatments, we won't go into all the details, but what I'm going to call a typical diet was 56% forage. The low forage was 37%, so it's pretty low. And corn, silage, alfalfa was the forages. Was there any reason for those two numbers, or is that you just wanted the typical one is typical, but why you came up with 37 or?
We wanted to go, we were formulating those diets based off forage NDF. And we actually formulated the diets to about 11.5% forage NDF. And we ended up a little bit higher than that. Based in that, Ariana did a lot of looking at the literature. A study by yourself was one of those that we utilized in this paper. A lot of the times when people looked at high and low forage, they were also changing starch, or depending on how different ways people were looking at it. I guess something different in this study, because our goal was how can we maintain milk production. We kept total starch content, total crude protein content of the diets the same. So we were aiming for about 11.5% forage NDF. Of course, when we do a lot of this research, sometimes we may push it a bit below what commercially people might do. I know when we first showed this diet to a couple people, they're like, those cows, that's too low a forage. And we're like, they probably go lower in California and some other places, right? So there's lots of ways we can feed the cows. So very conceptual, applicable here to Michigan, Midwest here with the type of diets and feed ingredients we have available.
Just for the listeners, the diets I'm rounding things off here, but 19.2 versus about 12.7 forage NDF. So it might not be as low as you want, but it's still low.
Still low. And of course,
go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say another big difference between the treatments were that in that low forage diet, we did add some palmitic-acid-rich supplement, and we supplemented some better quality proteins, some different quality protein sources. We had some blood meal and then some synthetic methionine and lysine in that diet as well. Again, our goal wasn't just to look at the effects of fat supplementation or amino acid. It was putting it within that context of low forage diet. One of the take homes from this would be follow-up work would be, I think, how useful or how needed would be some of those supplemental sources if you were going to go to that low forage diet, from a consistent standpoint. So I think any good paper leaves more research questions,
job
right?
Job security.
Yes.
And as you pulled forage out, you put in byproducts, which is typical. Beet pulp. You have corn gluten. I don't know if that's gluten feed or meal. Soy hulls and cottonseed, all those went up in the low forage diet. So that's a typical replacement.
Mm-hmm.
But what's not typical would be, when with low forage diets, usually total NDF goes up, starch goes down. And you'd kept them the same, 26 starch and 30 NDF. So this is kind of unique in typical byproduct or lower forage diets, which is interesting. Like I said, most people would feed lower starch.
Yeah, but I agree. The literature would show that the big difference we did do here again is we took out all of the high moisture corn out of that low forage diet and made up that with dry corn. In the conventional one, we had about 1/3 to 2/3 dried to high moisture corn, which isn't untypical in higher producing cows here in Michigan. But so total starch is the same,
but fermentability
of that starch is very different. And of course, we did that from a concern with milk fat depression risk, a primary one there.
That was my first question I had written down.
Oh, sorry.
If you'd have left high moisture in, do you think it'd have been as successful in maintaining milk fat as it was?
No.
Okay. No. Right answer.
Yeah.
Adam, I'm saying this tongue in cheek, but the starch level is quite low for a Michigan diet.
They are, yes. I mean, high 20s, 30s, and 31 now isn't uncommon with some of our. Of course, we have very high producing cows here in Michigan as well, right? And I think we continue to. Maybe this is a brag for our dairy producers in Michigan, but I think we continue to top the charts for milk production per cow, I think, across the country here. But so sometimes I think we feed too much starch sometimes, and there's maybe some opportunities around some other sources to help maybe drive milk fat. But as Bill said, the big thing here was we switched those starch sources. We needed a much less fermentable diet when we had much less forage fiber in that diet. So.
I guess you added like I said, NDF's the same, protein's the same, starch is the same, but you added fat. I think it was 1.8% fat. So the question always is what came out. So
it was about. I think our goal we did we aimed for 1.5% supplemental fatty acids, and I think we were about 1.4. We pulled soy hulls out for that fat supplement.
But what nutrient would it come? Because like I said, total NDF, the major nutrients are all the same. So what came out? Would it be?
I guess it's probably a little bit of everything. That we pulled out soy hulls. So if anything, some fermentable NDF would have been the main nutrient that we were reducing by taking out that. But then we were adding in more soy hulls. I guess let me back up on that. I think that's impossible for me to say because we made so many dietary changes here. I don't think we were just changing one nutrient, and that could be a criticism of the paper or it's a reason why we did it. So I need to correct myself. We didn't just pull out soy hulls in this study. I get confused with some of our other studies. This one, it was a whole kitchen sink, I guess, approach. So,
bunch of ingredients.
you know, I can't. Yes.
With the Let's Forage, you had to pull some ash out because the mineral supplementation is the same. So some ash had to go out.
Okay.
With that, and then I don't know on all these other organic acids would be lower in the low-forage diet because you're yanking silage out. So I think of things that we don't typically measure ash we typically measure, but those would be the things.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there now, and it's just because some of it's a rounding effect with some of those because it's only 1.4%, so that could be a couple point units across some of those nutrients. So.
When I read this, I understood the fat adding. The one question I had is why did you choose to add amino acids to that diet and not the typical diet? And added amino acids now are becoming more and more typical. Yeah.
We thought long and hard about how we were going to do this, and we spoke with some nutritionists that we spend a lot of time talking around all of our different diets with. I think the idea there was, what did we think we needed to do to not lose milk production on a very low forage diet? And one of the feedbacks there were if we were modeling that, maybe we wanted some more higher quality protein coming into that diet. Of course, you could argue, well, you should have balanced that in the other treatment, but again, that wasn't our focus. I would like to do this study as a factorial design in the future with 4 treatments, and then we could maybe look specifically at the added palmitic acid and the methionine and lysine parts of that. Sorry.
So, Adam, did you think you would lose milk yield on the lower forage diet, or were you more concerned about the fat yield?
I think if you ask most people, they thought we would probably lose milk yield and milk fat, right? And probably lose everything on a 12% forage NDF diet, right? And of course, as we're all fully aware, most of our milk markets, it's yield of fat, yield of protein, right? So that's kind of why we focused in maybe on the the fatty acid side and the amino acid side, given that we're also changing that rumen fermentability of the starch. It was a much less rumen fermentable starch. So maybe that's where maybe some of those supplemental amino acids were helping there.
I'm curious, what was what form was the beet pulp in that you added? Because you added quite a bit of beet pulp to the diet, I believe.
Oh, if I remember rightly, I think this was pellets. Yeah, I think typically we've had pellets come in. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Because we ran this study before COVID, and hard to remember anything before that now, right? So
that's right.
Yeah, everything's before or after, but this study finished actually in January 2020, if I recall. So.
It just was published last year. I wanted to say we picked more recent papers.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Thanks for highlighting how slow I was getting it out.
I did forget to mention this was in JDS Communications, published in 2024. If you want to read the paper. Did you hypothesize then with this lower forage diet to get reduced microbial protein synthesis? Was that the idea of adding back some amino acids?
Yeah, that was part of it, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes more sense to me now.
Yeah. The goal was to maintain or maybe potentially even increase, right? So, but the primary focus was there, could we save on forage use? Yeah. And it could be one of 5 or 6 reasons why you might need to do that at some point.
And again, just for the listeners, these were mid-lactation cows. Holstein cows averaging, I had that and I've lost it.
We're about
averaging about 100 pounds, give or take,
Yeah.
of milk. So good, decent
pretty
production.
good group of cows. So.
Why don't you, again, we talked about the treatments. It was basically taking out forage, putting in byproducts, but maintaining macronutrient concentrations. What about the fatty acid profiles of these diets?
That's
you
a good
did
question.
add supplemental fat to these diets, and
yeah, and I like to talk about the actual supplemental fatty acid. That's kind of where that's what I like to do. I think it's important to state that it was a palmitic-acid-rich prill, like an 80% palmitic-enriched, and I don't think we would have seen the same response if we had chosen maybe some other supplements. We were very specific that if we were wanting to maintain this on the milk fat side, based on the body of work we've done and others have done, palmitic acid was the approach to take with the supplemental fat there. So, we obviously increased total fat content of the diet, and that was primarily by increasing palmitic acid content of the diet to help drive milk fat. The other fatty acids stayed pretty similar in the diet in terms of oleic, linolenic. Really, we're talking about 6 fatty acids when we talk about fatty acids in dairy cow diets, unless it's a very unique situation. So we really focused in on palmitic acid there.
So again, just for the listeners, you had byproducts, you added supplemental fat. The control diet or the typical diet did not include supplemental fat, and then you added supplemental lysine and methionine to the low-forage diet.
Yes.
If we get to what did you expect before we get to what you found? What did you expect on production measures?
My hope, I guess, was that we would not lose production.
Mm-hmm. So maintain fat, protein yields. What about intake? What did you expect on intake?
Well, typically, there's kind of a mixed bag with like lower forage diets and intake. Certainly with higher byproduct diets, I think we often see higher intakes, right, from a more fermentable NDF source. I certainly didn't think we'd lose intake. I thought potentially we would gain a bit of intake, which would hopefully help somewhat with maintaining that production side. And we did see we got about just under about a kilo of higher intake, dry matter intake in these cows.
Which is pretty much what I would have expected. It's about the typical when you take forage out. And so, but then typically we don't see more component yields. We see higher intakes, equal components, and lower feed efficiency. And I've always said that's just the cost of not feeding forage. But you found sometimes higher protein yields and higher fat yields.
Yeah, we increased fat and protein yields, so that led to significant improvements in fat-corrected and energy-corrected milk. Energy-corrected milk was almost 2 kilos more.
Substantial.
On that low fat. So we exceeded our goal of maintaining. Now, of course, you could argue, well, they put fat and better amino acids, some supplemental amino acids in. And yes, we did. Would that have happened if we hadn't had those and it just been a byproduct driven approach? Probably wouldn't have happened the same, right? At best, we might have almost caught up with where we were. But again, we really did this study I think all our studies are industry driven, need driven. This one wasn't really driven to answer a specific change in nutrient question. It was can we do this? That approach? And we could be criticized for that, or you could be a job well done. But I was surprised that we got quite that improvement that we did. Now, some of it's intake as well, right? But I think if you look at this literature, and Ariane does a nice job in a succinct way of summarizing some of the previous work in this area, that I do think that the added palmitic acid and the better quality amino acids there certainly was a key part of getting that higher energy corrected milk.
I'd interpret this not so much. When I read this, I didn't compare it so much to the control. I said it just shows that you can get really good component yields with low forage diets, and this is what you have to do. It's not saying it's better than, because again, it may be the fat, it might be the amino acids. It's just you can do it. You can get good yields with these low forage diets, and you have to. I
think that's an excellent way of looking at it. I think I need to start sort of talking it more about it that way, because we get caught in that compared with this, But like you said, it's if I remember rightly, as we write in here, we saved or spared about 5.5-6 kilos of forage dry matter per cow per day, and I think these are 28-day periods as well, so a bit longer than our typical treatment periods in the work we do. And with that, we wanted to get a better, more information on changes in body weight in these cows. And for a long time now, we've weighed cows 3 days a week, every week on a study. I got that from Dr. Van der Haar here, has done that on a lot of that feed efficiency work. And I think that's a much more sensitive way of getting changes in body weight than just doing a before and after. Right. I think we can get to, and those cows actually gained a bit more body weight on that low forage. I think or half as much again. Yeah. So I think we're confident that in this pretty high producing cow, we could, as you said, get some good production. When these cows aren't losing body weight, they're gaining actually more body weight. Maybe that says that maybe there's an opportunity to get even more milk if we can avoid that additional body weight gain there. And of course, maybe later lactation, maybe that might not be so good. We want to avoid excessive body weight gain.
Do you think I'll let you in a minute, Clay, just finish up. Do you think these were mid-lactation cows? Do you think, and this I don't know if there's an answer, but on these low forage diets, cow health is always a fundamental issue. Do you think 28 days is enough for it to express any potential health issues, or it won't do any hoof problems? You won't be able to see that, but other issues.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, from a rumen health point of view, I think that's plenty of time to see any upsets that side. I think if we'd seen something that would be detrimental, we wouldn't have seen improvements in milk production. I still think of it very much, the first thing, if an animal or a human's unhealthy, one of the first things that drops is productivity, right? So I don't think we would have seen this level of production if there was a long-term health. Yeah, maybe the hoof side of it would be, but we would have probably seen a rumen upset at that point, right? So I don't think we had any issues there. Now, if we hadn't swapped out high moisture for dry corn, that's a different discussion, right? So under the conditions we looked at here, I think we were successful with that low forage. And as I said, I think it was close to 6 kilos. So over that 28-day period, that's 150 kilos of dry matter forage a day. Over that 28 days that we stayed per cow.
So it is interesting that I would say job well done in hindsight on this one, because you got a 1 kilo increase in dry matter intake on the lower forage diet, but you got roughly a 2 kilo increase in energy corrected milk, which is close to what you would expect from that increase in dry matter intake, right? Yeah. I am curious. One thing I was curious about, you got a decrease in lactose percentage on that lower forage diet. Can you speculate on that?
Well, I'll be perfectly blunt on that. Lactose yield didn't change. So I don't really worry too much about content. She made the same amount of lactose basically, so I don't think too much about that. There's some dilution there, right? So 4.9 versus 4.8 Sometimes you maybe have to be careful how we interpret statistical differences as well, right? The other part of that success there, I think, like you said, we are feeding a lower forage NDF diet, but there's consistent data out there around. We think about the palmitic acid just from the milk fat side, but palmitic acid can help improve fiber digestibility as well. So I will admit, Bill, that we did have fecal samples from this study, but one of the long-term freezers went down during COVID, and it took a while to realize, and then the samples weren't any good after that. So, of course, that's one of those we would have loved to have had some of that, right? That would help explain this a little bit more.
What about early lactation cows? I don't know the days. I mean, you just say mid-lactation is probably in there, but how low can we go in early lactation?
Well, I think I don't have a number off the top of my head, but I would like to look at some of the diets fed in parts of the US and other parts of the world where they don't rely so much on forage. We could probably go down. The one caveat, I think we could probably go down to this sort of level, apart from in that real fresh period, that first couple of weeks. Obviously, I've spent a lot of time with Mike Allen and around some of the hepatic oxidation and that importance of gut feel in that very early lactation period. That would certainly be a time where I don't think we'd want to go too low. But once these cows, I think, were getting stuck, it got through that short time, and we're looking to drive peak milk yield, we could probably go to a lower forage diet than what we typically do now.
I did some rough calculations here. These are, back of the envelope, but the low forage diets put out about 3 to 4 mega cows more in net energy a day, both in milk components and body weight change. They ate 1 kilo more, so the energy concentration of these diets had to be quite a bit higher in the low forage diet, even though the nutrients, again, the major nutrients are all the same. So some of it's fat, some of it's higher gross energy. But do you think even with this very low forage diet, fiber digestibility could have been increased? Again, you're putting in beet pulps, highly digestible.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Like you said, the fatty acids were the only real major nutrient that was increased there. I think, obviously, if total NDF digestibility would have gone up, based on the literature with all those byproducts in the diet, right? I do, based on what we've seen, I think there's a pretty linear improvement in NDF total tract NDF digestibility with increasing palmitic acid intake. So I have no reason to think that having the palmitic in there probably helped NDF digestibility. Of course, like as you said, we can't compare between the two really so much, and that's where a follow-up study would be helpful, right? Maybe we just had low forage diets, and then we, with and without palmitic or some of the amino acids. That would be some helpful follow-up studies to, if there was a lot of drive to these low forage diets.
Yeah, because again, with just byproduct replacement, very often fiber digestibility goes down with low forage diets. It actually, even in vitro, they're more fermentable, but in vivo, I think they just scoot through so fast. But
of course, yeah.
But in this, just doing the math, the digestibility of this diet had to go up a fair amount, and more than just the fat. So this palmitic might be fixing this depressed, I don't want to say depressed, but lower fiber digestibility.
Yeah, and there's some in vitro studies published recently around palmitic and NDF digestibility that would indicate that it's a rumen effect. And then Jeff Firkins, in his recent ISRP review in JDS, has a nice section in there on how fatty acids or specific fatty acids may improve NDF digestibility. And we've looked at that palmitic versus no added fat, also palmitic supplement versus a stearic saturated mix type supplement. And it is specific to the palmitic acid. probably improving, those major fiber digesters, probably helping those guys, those better growth of those, better efficiency of those. But again, that's a targeted reason why we chose the fatty acid supplement we did, was milk fat fiber digestibility.
So this might not, if you just put fat in, off the shelf fatty acid, you might have still found decent production, but the feed efficiency might have gone down, as we typically expect with these low forage diets. So
yeah, no, I agree. My desire over the next few years, I think, would be how we've moved more and more away from just talking about crude protein in the diet to amino acids. We need to get there with the fat side of it. We've made a good leap recently, I think, more from ether extract to total fatty acids, and the NASEM model, the NASEM review that Dr. Armentano did and yourself worked on, done a really good job talking why we need to talk about fatty acids, not ether extract. Next step is, well, which fatty acids? I get calls or questions all the time about there's this new product out on the market. That what I tell nutritionists on the fatty acid supplement side, two first questions if someone's trying to sell you something new: what's the fatty acid profile and the total fat content of that product? That's gonna drive what responses you're gonna get to it. And the total fat content really is only so you're comparing apples to apples, like a 90% versus a 60% product, right? How much would you have to feed of both of those? But the fatty acid profile, and I hope we've made some advances in that the last decade around palmitic, stearic, oleic acids, particularly.
Well, one of the limitations, can a lab measure it, commercial lab, and now they can do these fatty acids. So we should be making this change. So it just 20 years ago, it was almost impossible for commercial labs to measure these things, and now we can. So
yeah, and this NIR calibrations are very good. So doesn't even have to be wet chemistry. The wet chemistry for fatty acid analysis is gas chromatography. That's a slow, long process, but the calibrations now, we've been involved in some of those are as good for that as I think for other aspects of feed analysis.
So Adam, you said that you ask them, what is the fatty acid profile? What fatty acid profile do you want to see, and is it dependent upon the basal diet?
That's a good question. And I guess the good scientific answer is it depends. Yeah. Right. So
that's the extension answer. Not the real
So I'll try and go a bit more. I think it depends on the basal diet to some extent, and the total fat content in the basal diet. We have another paper actually in this same issue of JDS Communications that we've talked about that looked at high and low fat diets and the responses to different fat supplements. That's a good place to look for that. Probably more important than basal fat content in my mind would be which type of cow are you feeding? Is it a fresh cow, a peak cow, or a mid to late lactation cow? We have good data for fresh and very high producing cows. I'd like a palmitic and oleic blend around that 70-20, 60-30 of the two. And as we go through lactation, I'd take a higher palmitic one. Of course, then you get into some discussions about that there's only one fat coming on the farm, right? And some different opportunities. Now with some of the newer work with different oil seeds, that's going to come into play there, especially with some of the work with high oleic soybeans that can probably replace, I'd say not all types of commercial fat supplements, but certainly can replace some that supply similar fatty acids.
Yeah, thanks. What else you got for us, Bill?
I'm at the end of my questions, so I've got them all answered. So
I had kind of an off-the-wall question, and is it conceivable as the genetics continue to increase, the nutrient requirements of the cow continues to increase, the concentration of the diet continues to get more concentrated? Is it conceivable that to achieve that at some point, someday, we're going to purposely reduce the amount of fiber in the diet, right? Your hypothesis was we don't have enough, and that's the reason why we need to consider this. Do you ever see that happening?
That's an interesting way of looking at that. I mean, as these cows get higher and higher production, or most importantly, increasing, pounds of fat and protein, we have to supply the nutrients and the building blocks for them to make that fat and protein. Some of that may result in some lower of the fiber part of it, but the other thing to think about there is we've talked about palmitic acid and it's important to milk fat. We had higher levels of cottonseed in the diet, and they were reasons that there were good reasons around milk fat to do that. But let's not forget that approximately half of milk fat is coming from acetate and butyrate produced in the rumen, which is mostly coming from fiber digestion, right? Yeah. So, and that's, you could argue that's the least expensive source of milk fatty acids to some extent, right? But the mammary gland needs both, and we've been doing some work lately looking at, if we supply different proportions of each of, those substrates, how does the mammary gland respond to that? It's very flexible. Ultimately that mammary gland has to make a fluid milk fat at body temperature, and that's where some of those short chain fatty acids in de novo produced coming from acetate and butyrate are key. Converting stearic to oleic is key there in the mammary gland as well. So that we never want to lose sight of that importance of the acetate and butyrate coming out of the rumen. The mammary gland isn't going to make milk fat just with preformed fatty acids, right? So, and I think, to me, probably the better way to address that, Scott, is maybe we certainly go down to lower forage diets, right? Lower fiber diets. We probably want better quality. Yeah. To get more acetate and butyrate coming into the system.
Makes perfect sense. Yeah.
And we've been doing that, right? We do limit indigestible fiber. That's the limitation.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that, gentlemen. This has been a great conversation. I've enjoyed it. What I'd like to do now with last call, Clay, is start with you. Provide us just kind of a few take-home messages for the audience.
Tonight's last call question is brought to you by Niasure Precision Release Niacin. Niacin is a proven vasodilator for heat stress reduction and a powerful antilipolytic agent for lowering high blood NEFA in transition cows. Protected with Balchem's proprietary encapsulation technology, you can be sure it is being delivered where and when your cows need it. Learn more at balchem.com/Niasure.
Well, I've enjoyed this talk, or the discussion on this one. I would say, Adam, this is a study in need of more treatments. You already mentioned that earlier, right? Yeah. About repeating this. So it's a very interesting paper. When I first read it, I'm like, there's some treatments missing here, but there are key points here. So if you could only do this with 2 treatments, it was a very interesting way to look at this. And I think you were successful going to the lower forage diet, but doing a number of other diet modifications to actually improve energy corrected milk. So I think you did a nice job with that. So there are some good takeaways from this, for sure.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Clay. Bill, another good paper. What's some key takeaways for us?
I think this just reemphasizes that there's a lot of ways to feed cows, and where these diets are extremely different, production essentially the same, maybe even a little bit better for lots of reasons. But it just emphasizes that there is no one recipe. There's lots of ways to get very high component yields. And some are not so typical.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. And you hit on a good point there, Clay, finally, that, one of the challenges, with doing some of this type of applied research is that we have to balance up what would be ideal to do from a treatment wise versus what could be done maybe from a cow availability or cost of running the experiment. In an ideal world, we probably would have had at least 4 treatments, right? And then someone would say, well, you need to look at this now. But in this case, we had to balance what we had available and what we could do versus the question we wanted to do. And it was a pretty quick turnaround need for our local industry at that point with that low forage year. I think we've covered a lot of it. I think this is for me, is an exciting area. This, going from ether extract fat now to fatty acids, right? And how can we apply some of that information into other aspects of the diet, right? We've often talked about energy and energy and protein, right? Or energy and amino acids, and I always wonder what energy means per se, but fatty acids, carbohydrate, NDF and stuff. So there's a lot more work that can go into this area if there's the desire and drive to look into this more. But I like what Bill said earlier on. Rather than comparing the 2 treatments from a practical point of view, it's yes, we can get good milk components from a very low forage diet here in the Midwest, right?
Yeah, thank you for that. Gentlemen, I said it once before, this has been a real treat. I'll say it again, this has been a real treat. This is a favorite part of my job, right? Getting to sit around and talk about science with some of the top scientists in the world and have a few drinks. So I really appreciate the opportunity to do that with you guys and here at the Real Science Exchange Pub. So I want to thank you for all that you do. And to our loyal audience, once again, we thank you, and well, we hope you learned something. We hope you had some fun, and we hope to see you next time here at the Real Science Exchange, where it's always happy hour and you're always among friends.
We'd love to hear your comments or ideas for topics and guests, so please reach out via email at anh.marketing@balchem.com with any suggestions, and we'll work hard to add them to the schedule. Don't forget to leave a 5-star rating on your way out. You can request your Real Science Exchange t-shirt in just a few easy steps. Just like or subscribe to the Real Science Exchange and send us a screenshot along with your address and t-shirt size to anh.marketing@balchem.com. Balchem's Real Science Lecture Series of webinars takes place on the first Tuesday of every month, with the top research and nutrition topics that will impact your business. We also include small ruminant, monogastric, and companion animal-focused topics throughout the year. Visit balchem.com/realscience to see the upcoming topics and to register for future webinars. You can also access past webinars and search for the topics most important to you.